Namaste and in la catch, and welcome to this week's episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and this week's guest is a longtime entrepreneur, Karl Dakin. He is known as the Capital Coach with a podcast of the same name that he just started, as I recall. He helps folks overcome the challenges to raising capital. He's an entrepreneur. He's worked with startup business design. He's a growth strategist, capital coach, private economic developer, and educator. He says, I enjoy working with startup businesses, helping them to grow and improve the world. That's the most important thing. 42 years at it you've been, Karl, and your specialties are innovation, business design, strategic growth planning, funding investment, opportunity zones, business formation, contracts, licensing, entrepreneurship, education, dispute resolution, collaboration, and technology marketing. Gosh, what don't you know about business, Karl? And thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Zeb. No, it's been a long trail, so to speak, and like any good cowboy, I have to knock the dust off, as we get off the horse. But I've been working with small businesses. Actually, the story is I started my first small business at the age of 7, and my parents at that time thought that all their children would have musical abilities, and I lived out in the country, so they would drag me into town every Saturday and ask me, to go to music lessons, and that proved to be a bad investment on their part. But typically after every music lesson, I had time left over, and I realized I could go to a local drugstore, buy candy at retail, take it back to the country schoolhouse, and mark it up and make a profit.
Oh my gosh. Now that's an
That worked.
entrepreneur.
It worked very well for several weeks until a number of parents started trying to figure out how their kids were coming home with candy from school. And I was told to end my first entrepreneurial venture.
What was your exit strategy then?
My exit strategy was not to get yelled at by my parents.
There you go. That's very good. And those kinds of things, those promptings, and talking with my guests, we all have this inner development, this inner voice, knowing connection that we have, usually as children to begin with, and we kind of accept that as being normal. And then as we grow up, I don't know if it's pushed aside or society pushes it aside, and we just acquiesce to trying to fit in. With that, though, how did you did you have something as a child that you felt that there was a greater connection and inner knowing or something of that nature that you were experiencing? And what was that like?
Yeah, I can't really point to anything in my childhood. I grew up on a farm. My family had both a farm business and a car dealership and implement dealership. And we learned a lot of lessons that way, which is make hay while the sun shines. And there isn't an hour of the day you can't be working if you got the right tools available to you. So there are a lot of good
Very
lessons.
true.
I mean, but at the same time, we were all ag oriented, and the agricultural industry had been in decline for decades. It wasn't that visible because of the slow moving transition. But by the time I got to high school, and I was starting to pick up on the fact that we were changing how we were doing business. We were seeing less and less business activity, and I wasn't clear why or what was going on, but I was in Kansas, and in Kansas, farmers in general are the most conservative people you could ever want to see, because if you do one thing differently, it might result in failure, and failure could result in catastrophic failure. And so you're always watching the edges. And kind of the joke was that we would make money 3 years out of 5. We just never knew what year we were in. And so this whole sense of do it the same old way was entrenched in everything, all day, every day.
Well, it came from, it seemed, if I can go off on not a tangent, but a reflection of being close to nature, right? This is one of the things that I've noticed with the guests is that at some point there's this really intimate connection with nature. It sounds like you grew up with it, so you never had to question it. It was just part of your natural upbringing. And so you were able to take that forward, which I think is a plus, and obviously has been with what you're doing now and the development you've had and who you've been able to help. So what happened coming out of high school and when you moved on from there?
Well, it basically, in my family, my mother had decided that I should go on to college, and that was no simple statement or path to take because no one in my family had ever gone on to college.
Hmm.
I was the first person to get a college degree, and that turned everything upside down because as I was seeing the greater world, I was outside of my little sphere of influence and got to see how other people were doing things and so on. I came to the decision that I was not going to be a farmer. I was not going to go back to the farm. I was not going to pick up the family business, and I was going to do something different. And I didn't have clear direction,
Mhm.
and it was also very clear to everyone around me. I was running away from home at an older age.
Okay.
And I didn't have a destination in mind. It wasn't like I was running towards something. I was clearly putting as much distance between me and the farm as I possibly could.
Sometimes how it starts, right? You don't want to do what the tradition has been, and there's something else that is calling you. You just don't know what it is yet. How did you find that?
It was, we talk about great strategies today, and I like to position myself as a strategist where I'm forward looking, I'm considering all the options,
Mhm.
but I was backing into my career at high speed. So during undergraduate in college, it was still not uncommon for me to get the call, come home, work this week, and leave on Friday, be home 2 hours later, put in a 24-hour shift and be back in class by Monday morning. And this was not setting well with me.
Mm.
Plus, I wasn't sleeping a whole lot. So I decided that to get further away from home, I needed more education. That seemed to be the key to escape. So I went on to law school, and it was funny because when I applied, I didn't know a single lawyer. I'd seen Perry Mason, and that was the extent of
Wasn't
my
that a great
total.
show?
Yeah, he's always wins. I thought
Yeah.
that was cool. Uh, but I entered into law school and got totally saturated in the law and what that meant. And again, that we're adding layers and layers of information that told me that I needed to get even further away from the farm. So 24 hours after I got my law degree, I moved to Denver, where I now live. And and that was to put physical distance between me and the farm so that the question about when I'm coming back was put off the table forever.
Sure, I understand that, and good for you. Now, it also occurs to me that in those cases, the moving away from is also almost unconsciously moving towards something else that you've intended to create, and then it shows up in front of you to step into. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, and that's kind of what happened was as I was leaving law school, I was trying to figure out where I was going to go, what kind of job I was going to get. It was all premised on passing the bar and becoming an official lawyer,
Mhm.
and that's kind of as short-sighted as my goals were set at the time. And the if you want to call it whatever happened at that time, I had a brother-in-law who had started a software engineering firm before software engineering was a term of art,
Mhm.
and genius, understood the technology inside out, had no understanding of the business. He'll argue that with me, but that's still my opinion.
Of course,
And
that's
so,
siblings, right?
yeah, and so he said, well, while you're studying for the bar, why don't you come help me out with this? So we took a business that was relatively new, upside down, going the wrong direction, turned it around, made it profitable, and he got bought out by a company that wanted all the success and his reputation and his knowledge to go with it. And during that time frame, a number of things started to crystallize in that I found out I could talk tech with anybody. It didn't matter how complicated it was, didn't, you know, And that combined with my legal training made me an interesting hybrid where I could talk two languages that most people couldn't speak well by themselves, but in combination, I was a rarity. And so in a very short period of time, I was being published. I was invited to teach graduate programs at universities and so forth. And it turned out that this ability to work with any degree of new tech, innovation, whatever, and understanding that was a knack of mine. I can jump into almost anything and I don't get lost. I know what I don't know, and then I figure out the rest. And this became kind of my career, is working with high-tech startups, saying, well, yeah, you've got an idea, but is it a product or service? Is it a market that's going to buy it? Can you make money at it? And it's been a continuous learning curve since then to get to where I'm at today. But after several hundred iterations, I'm getting a little better at it.
Got a little insight and wisdom now, maybe. Right?
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm hip to that. In this bridging of languages, and my wife's a piano teacher. She's a piano pedagogue, was trained in Mussorgsky College in St. Petersburg, Russia. Moved here right before the dissolution of the USSR. I only met her a half dozen years ago, or a little beyond that. So way beyond that. However, music being a language as well, the tech language, the sales language, the critical thinking that's involved, and you apparently have this knack for understanding greater systems and breaking them down into logical pathways that you can then explore with the questions you ask in any direction in order to determine how that fit is. Is that kind of what you found yourself able to do?
Yeah, they talk about connecting the dots. And again, kind of the joke with me is I see dots that nobody else sees, and I think they're related. And so somebody will go, well, how do you do that? And I start putting pieces together and go, where'd you start from on that? I go, over here. And they're going, I don't know what you're talking about. I go, no, they're related. And,
as everything is, right? Everything's connected. This is something we're learning from quantum physics as well as being taught from the spiritual teachings for eons. Now we're figuring it out that it actually is a practical and pragmatic way to look at things.
Yeah, and then sometimes the relationship makes sense, and sometimes after analysis you go, that's not, either it's not going to work or it's not going to work today. We have to get practical at some point along the spectrum of analysis and go, is this something I can do? And it's been a challenge in my entire career to understand the difference between potentiality and reality.
Kind of like looking at Schrodinger's cat, right?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it not? I don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah,
right?
let's open the box. Oh, it's dead. Sorry.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that's kind of funny about the quantum theorist and the multiple plane or multiple world theory. To me, you experience things from one place, from one point of awareness, and that's all you've got. You can imagine all these things, but it seems more like a thought exercise than reality in that case, which is great to be able to theorize. And yet we've got to come back and what's our direct experience? Where are we at? Who's in front of us? What's around us? How can we integrate with that in order to be successful ourselves and help others same time, which is what you kind of devoted your life to do, is bridging those gaps, connecting those dots, being able to bring that to bear in situations. What have you found was one of your most intriguing questions or challenges that you had to pull a logic train together and explain it?
I've had lots of challenges. Typically,
I'm sure.
I'll have an inventor come to me with a brand new idea, which may be so new that even I'm like, I'm not seeing any dots. I don't see.
You're in the void, huh?
Yeah, and so you kind of chip away at it, keep asking questions, trying to get into it, and you may come away with nothing. You say there may be something here, but I'm sorry, I apologize, I can't do anything
But just
to
not
help.
yet.
Yeah, And in other cases, you'll see something that has this tremendous potential. It makes logical sense, but you're up against, I will call it the momentum, the status quo that says it'll be very, very hard to implement this at any level of any size in my lifetime. And I shared a story once. I was working with some students on a capstone project that led us to plant teak trees in Belize. And we went down and set up the plantation because teak is a valuable hardwood with unique properties that's great for boat decks and other outdoor gear. But it's a fast growing tree. So in 15 years, you can have a full grown tree you can get to harvest. And the students were all excited. And then they started looking at other types of trees, and they drug in one from Africa. And they go, hey, professor, take a look at this. And my first question is, what's the time to harvest from planting? And they're going, oh, this one's about 35 years. And I just started laughing. I said, I'll be gone by then. I don't care, you know.
Did you explore the Polonia trees at all?
That was one of the ones we were looking at. Yeah, we looked at a wide variety of trees, and some of them are awesome trees. They have so many different utilities and markets and applications, but you still have to grow them up. And so this becomes a timing issue when you look at opportunities. Is this going to meet tomorrow's threshold? Is it next year, 5 years, 10 years? And we as humans are very short-term thinkers. So anything over
Really?
5 years is way out there.
It is, and even with Moore's Moore's law, we're even less than that now.
Well, we are. No, I remember way back when, 37 years ago, the CEO of Silicon Graphics was looking at the venture capital model of investing that said we're going to invest here and then we're going to cash out 7 to 10 years down the road. And he was laughing at the model. He says, well, right now, the turnover in technology is 100% every 3 years in my market. So you're telling me you're going to make an investment and experience 2 complete turnovers before you can exit the investment. I don't know how you're going to do that. Yeah. And this last year with the 4.0 version of ChatGPT hitting the market in AI, where we're now moving at light speed that I have no idea how fast we're going, but the revolution from AI is going to be beating us up or helping us out, however your position on that, for a good while.
Now, do you find that, there's a lot of concerns about it? For me personally, I jumped into it. My stepson encouraged me to look into it a couple of years ago, and I kind of put him off. And then maybe a year ago, I started toying around with it, and I was amazed at the amount of emotional intelligence with its responses. How is it? If something has that kind of capacity to respond in kind with kindness, why would it be malevolent in any way, or why should we be afraid of it in that? I realize it's how we use it, right? And it will do what we tell it to do, but I think that there's some safeguards in that built in.
Well, again, I'm a big science fiction fan. I can tell you how many books I've read about a sentient artificial intelligence going off the rails and doing something highly destructive. And sometimes it's done with evil intent, somehow attributed to an automation. In other cases, it's merely doing what it was told. It was just too stupid to know that that was a bad way to implement the instruction set. So this is where I think a lot of people today have legitimate concerns, is where humans basically offload or delegate responsibility to something that is not an intelligence. And so if you say, hey, I want you to go out and wash my car, and it goes out and gets a hose with a robot, washes off, no problem. If it gets in the car and drives it down to the car wash, that might be a completely different story. But we're seeing things today, or people are classically, with every new technology, you're going to have good and bad. You're going to have bad users, bad actors. People are using it as a tool to do bad things.
And we hear that first. That's our nature.
Well, it is part of the natural evolution, because there are bad actors who are doing a good job of being on the edge of technology, just like there are people on the good edge. And the vast majority of the bell curve we're all late arrivals to how to use the technology and when to use it. And
Mhm.
I've lived on the bleeding edge of multiple technologies, so you see how it unfolds. And there are days when you're just happy that the bad actors are not necessarily the brightest bulb in the light set, because if they were, life could get a lot uglier in a hurry.
Now that brings us back to the question of what's going on internally and the relationship, the connectedness, and the general harmony that exists in nature, which we're part of. We just tend not to realize that, as we were talking earlier. We tend to want to manage everything rather than be part of it in a holistic fashion and include it in those system variables and the way we look at things, which we've not been able to do so well because of our short-sightedness and our inability to expand our minds to see beyond what we think is real. Do you see that having an effect on the growth and expansion of AI, the human interaction, and how we may be evolving toward a better systematization of information and access and using it for creative solutions opposed to destructive purposes based on the lack of resonance that the malevolent or the evil guys or nasty guys would have, because that obviously doesn't fit. It only fits in their push for market share.
Yeah, I mean, most people, as I see it, who act in a way that is contrary to our social existence are doing it in their own self-interest, which means they tend to be more short-sighted rather than long-sighted in what they do, which I think gives hope to us that eventually we will turn the corner or we'll get back to where we were.
Everything is
I see
temporary and transitory, right?
exactly. The think some of the things that AI can do, which we're already seeing breakthroughs everywhere, is they have this ability to see more quicker. So when we talk about a person's thought pattern, you have like so many concepts go through your brain every so many seconds. Well, an AI could be doing this at 10,000, 100,000, a million times a second. So in some ways, they're living in a different time continuum than we are. And if we then apply that to our short life, because now that I've lived so long, I was talking yesterday about it. I had one of the first TRS-80 personal computers, and that was an 8-bit,
Mhm.
capacity computer, and everybody's like, I can't wrap my mind around that. I go, that's fair. I understand, that I've only lived so long. If I live to be 500 years, then I would see certain things happen, certain cycles occur, where we go up and down, and I would start seeing patterns evolve of, oh, if I do this, I'm going to have this long-term consequence. But right now I see as short-term consequences.
Mhm.
And so this is something that you get into product testing. They'll say, well, I have to test this 100,000 times before I put it on the market. And there are ways to accelerate what they call destructive testing or whatever, so that you don't have to wait 20 years before you put the
Right.
product on the market. I see AI can give us that longer term vision, that it will be able to go, if you do this little thing today, like take my Keurig plastic cup and throw it into the trash can, which I did do today. What will be the consequence if we keep doing that at this rate of growth over 100 years?
And it can
And if I
extrapolate things in a heartbeat and
right,
do that whole, systems view and scenario development, much like we know is going on with the war games and things like that behind closed doors, but yet it's even much faster and can go further in
right.
its assessment of the future. How do you think that that's going to affect the evolution of this connection from both internal and external. You know, we live half inside, half outside, and we're kind of bereft of talking about the inside and our real emotional concerns and maybe even, you know, I hear the word love being used more in the business world, and bringing that kind of awareness and sensitivity as a servant leader kind of opportunity. How do you see that coming about, or do you?
No, I think we are seeing some changes take place in the internet, AI, better forms of communication are contributing to that. It's been a concept that I'm getting more focused on, which is this larger concept called community. And ordinarily community is defined by your backyard or how far you can throw a baseball from your front step. It's very geographical in its definition. But as we start talking about the fact that we now have worldwide access to anybody who's on the internet, a community could be anybody anywhere in the world. And then the question is, well, who's in the community, who's outside the community? And we're kind of defining this as an alignment of values of we all think the same way, not in lockstep, but we all have the same value system. So we want to see things happen in a common way. And if we work together as a community, then we have the ability to do things, influence things, cause things to happen that we can't do individually. And in some ways, the United States was created as a community to run away from Britain, and you know, have the freedoms that we could have without a class system telling us that you're inferior just because you're born on this place as opposed to that place.
And it appears that we've kind of taken on that mentality as a country now too. We've become what we were running away from.
Right. So I see.
Go ahead.
I see that. Yeah, the aspect of how we care about people, who we care about, our ability to communicate and work with those people is being improved by all these technical advances. And so we are now seeing groups of people starting to reach out, identify people they want to work with, talk with, do things with that we couldn't do before because we didn't know they existed. We didn't have any way to talk, nowhere to share information, no way to work together.
Did you see any increase coming out of the pandemic of that? You know, when we first went on lockdown here in Arizona, I had this, oh my God, here it goes. You know, here's the beginning of what we were talking about pre-show. And I turned to my wife and I said, you know, I really hope this obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration gets people to stop, go inside, examine, do some self-examination as to who they are, what they believe in, what they're willing to do, and where they want to go from there. A few months later, I start seeing virtual groups pop up online as if this was part of the process. Did you notice that as an increase or just a continuation of?
I will say it was a hyper accelerated shift took place. Prior to COVID, we had meetup groups, which are a way of forming a group or affinity group based on a topic or a subject of interest. And there are other things out there that were more physically oriented, and having the ability to jump on a call anytime, anywhere on Zoom or any of its competitors changed the way we interacted with people. It's still changing the way we interact with people. This program we're on today is a way we're interacting with people that wasn't practiced in any significant volume before COVID, but it suddenly, when you had no other choice, then this is the way we're going to do it. We're now reacting to this by saying there are limitations upon this way of communicating. Zoom is a one-on-many. Your ability to do a chat on the side where somebody else is in the room is extraordinarily limited compared to what we are already seeing occur in the new 3D virtual worlds, which are going to try to get us back to what would be some semblance of, I showed up at some kind of networking event in a person-to-person, and we all kind of started talking, and all the serendipity and all the things that occur out of that, maybe we can recreate in some of these newer, better virtual environments. But
Keyword,
it's all future. Yeah.
serendipity, and synchronicity. Do you notice that a lot? It just
I
means
think,
that you're looking for letting, kind of like Rainer Maria Rilke says, you ask the question, you let life answer it. Do you see that occurring? And that in a lot of ways, I see our motion kind of like a tesseract, where we throw our intention out in front and then envelop it as it comes back to us in some form. With
well,
speaking creators, right?
I will say some's intentional and some is serendipitous. And it gets interesting because when you look at it in reverse, you go, oh, I see what happened that caused that to occur. But as you were introducing me and you read off all those words, those are all key words in the internet. And if somebody's looking for me right now and they used any of those key words, the likelihood of finding me has gone up because I've been labeled, I've been boxed,
Right.
I'm a package out there.
You're on the screen. Right.
Yeah, and so for all those reasons, it may look like it's synchronicity, but it's because you were easier to find because they have a way to find you. I work with a lot of businesses where I say your number one problem is you're invisible to the entire world. They say, well, I want to go raise money. I said, well, that's fine, but if they can't see you, they're never going to invest in you.
Right.
But there are then mechanisms to make yourself more visible, to make yourself stand out, all these kinds of things I work with, because if we don't get enough people behind you, you're not going anywhere.
Very
And
true.
and these tools are getting better. They're coming into existence all the time. AI is going to accelerate this at an even faster pace because way back when, pre-COVID, we would stick labels on things, and those labels could be wrong. Or there could be a little bit off center, as we would say. And everybody goes, well, why did they call me that? I don't like that label, but that's the one that's, it's tattooed on my forehead.
Right.
AI can look beyond that.
Oh yeah,
So,
ask chat who you are online and let it give you that feedback. It's
well,
just,
and I'll give
it's
you an
mind-boggling
example.
what it can do.
It used to be before we had more data storage, every time somebody wrote an article, there would be an abstract. And it was somebody else's interpretation, usually, of what they read within your full article.
Or
And
scientific
those
papers are always
abstracts,
like that.
yeah, and they were often wrong or incomplete. And so people would read the abstract, go, I don't need to read that because that's not what I'm looking for. And they'd go off hunting for something else. AI right now has the ability to look at the abstract and go, that's wrong. And because it can read the entire context. And it may, as you say, it comes back to you in a way like, wow, it looks like there's emotion in this. Well, technically, no, there's not emotion. Its ability of saying, well, I saw this was written with 10 emotional words in it, so the person must like emotional words. So when I give it back to them, I'm going to give it back to them in the style in which it was asked of
Great
me.
point. Great point. You get back what you put in.
Well, and I'm working with AI Avatar right now as one of my projects for entrepreneurs and particularly focused on raising capital. And we always had trouble when we tried to educate entrepreneurs. We didn't know where the game was starting. Are they a rookie? Are they 2 years in, 5 years, 20 years in? And you'd end up asking all these questions so you would know where to start your educational program.
Well, and you got to do the assessment. This is one thing that, pardon me for going off a rant, having been in education, high school, college, adult learning, we don't assess the students before we try to teach them.
Well, but this is one of the things about AI we've learned is that when you ask a question of an avatar, it is assessing you by the question. So if you were to ask it a fourth year physics problem, it would go, okay, well, they already know the first 3 years, and I don't have to go back to those. But if the third question in the sequence indicates they didn't understand something, maybe we are going to go back and do a little fill the gap.
And then we go back and make those points to bring you up to speed.
Right, but it has an ability from what it's asked to kind of understand where to start, so you don't have to do the assessment. It's incorporated in how you ask the question, and that's a major improvement because we can skip over a lot of the time and money and so forth
And
that
it brings us
ordinarily.
back to the questions. How do we ask? This is the all important, right? Question. How do we ask better questions?
Yes. And it's fun for me because I'm training up my avatar to be a personalized version of me and everything I know. And
Wait,
I
with the
find,
capital coach hat?
yeah, yeah, the coach hat. Yeah. And it gets interesting because we all talk about idioms and American slang when you're talking to somebody in a foreign country. Says you want to lose them in a hurry, just say 4 or 5 slang terms. And they're like, I have no idea what you said. Um, right now, artificial intelligence is having some of these same issues. I can say something, and if I don't put certain words in my question, it's easier for them to get lost or go off in a different direction. So it's when I do an interview, you start pairing questions and answers. You want the answer to match up with the question. When I talk to an AI now, I want to make sure I'm framing my questions so that they're complete, that they don't go back 40 years in time or go sideways
How
on me.
often do we truncate our own sentences, right? Coming out of our mouth. We don't finish our thoughts and we anticipate the other to understand where we're going. In a lot of cases, that can be true, especially in established relationships and close knit, work groups, because you get to know each other. However, there's always
However, but no,
I miss
it's
something.
like, is your wife going to finish your sentences for you? Yes, because we've been around too long together,
Right?
But you're talking to someone new or who's coming from any slight variance in culture, background, experience, then you have to be a little more careful about how you frame your sentences so that they don't get lost along the way.
How can we be more conscious, self-examining, if you will, of that activity and be better in it based on the experiences that you've had?
Well, I work with a lot of different people. I serve as a kind of a middle person interpreter,
Hmm.
particularly between tech and business.
Right.
So I'm a hypersensitive, and then I was trained in the law, so I can step into either person's shoes on both sides of a confrontation. Go, yeah, I see your point. Yeah, I see your point, and then maybe we can reach some resolution if there's any commonality still left between the two warring parties.
Hmm.
So I'm overtrained for the average person, but I think anytime that you're communicating with someone, you have to be empathetic. You have to say, I have to put aside whatever is my goal, my agenda is, or whatever, and ask the first question is, what am I going to say or do? How does that, what is the other person trying to do? If
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
understand where they're coming from, then I often start a conversation with, I'm not going to talk about myself till you tell me who you are. And then I'll enter the conversation with something that matches up with them because I want to talk about something they're interested in. I can talk about myself all day long. I've
Well,
proven that.
isn't that marketing 101? Understand your audience before you say anything to them. Engage.
It is.
I had a mentor, who's 20 years my senior years ago, said, and he's a lawyer. Um, he said, there's really no conflict. There's just miscommunication. The two parties show up to the table with different dictionaries and they need to share them instead of speak from them.
Yeah, I mean, in the law, they teach you about meeting of the minds.
Mhm.
That before the contract starts, we want to make sure that we have all the points touching each other throughout the entire agreement. It's a nice theory objective to achieve, which is seldom accomplished. And it's not helped by people taking a process or procedure and trying to speak it in legalese and
Mhm.
then giving it back to the client who can't speak legalese. So we automatically have an interpretation issue before we ever get started.
Sure. And then you begin to get, the bipolar adversarial relationships that are even more difficult to overcome because they've anchored themselves in a certain position, and because they don't understand the other well enough usually, or something that has happened that has triggered them to, put up the walls. How does that when that occurs to you, and I'm sure it's had it, and multiple times probably. How do you get through that? What are some of the best techniques to do that that you found work?
Yeah, so I've been trained in dispute resolution, which is why it was on that long list of things. And I've been involved in some very interesting disputes of major scale. And the biggest problem is that most dispute resolution tries to find a winner, where it's like we're going to, award them this, we're going to give them this, we're going to do something like that, and that creates an adversarial um, action, no matter how you're going to go about it, because the other person's going to be the loser, however this turns out. If you go back and you ask both sides, what was your original objective? What did you want? What did you want? And they give you that original goal and objective. And you said, well, starting today, if we are going to try to achieve both goals, what would that look like? And usually this is like starting from zero in a new negotiation. Well, if you can define what that goal looks like, then you can compare it to where you were before. And the distance between those is not as far apart as our adversarial system will commonly
Because ultimately
create.
you're wanting to achieve a win-win, and that works for
Right.
everybody.
Right. It may not be the same thing you were going to get. You're not going to get 1,000 of this, or you weren't going to get something of that, but you're going to end up much closer to that if you stop and try to work together to make it happen, as opposed to work against each other.
Which is where that collaboration comes in rather than competition.
Yeah, and we were brought up to beat the brains out of our competitors.
Right.
I mean,
That's so
and
last century now, right? It's just,
it feels that way. Yes, it was last century, but it still shows up in thinking all the
well, of
time.
course, it takes a while for it to for us to get that pattern out of our system and change it with a different habit, either from training, education, need, right? Or the chaos that we're tired that we're experiencing because we can't let go of it. And something's got to change.
Yeah, I was brought up where if you're building software, you had to protect it with every layer of intellectual property you could imagine. And then open source code came along, and I had to take my brain apart and wash it out because it's a completely contrary thinking of, oh, why don't we all work together to have more good for everybody? And you're like, sounds right, makes sense as you say it, but that's contrary to everything we're doing for competitive advantage.
Mhm. But
So
it felt
somewhere,
good though. That's the difference, right? It feels there's go back into that inner position, right? At a gut level, ancient philosophy, the indigenous philosophy, you got three brains, the gut, the heart, and the head. Vibrationally, we're connected to everything through the neurosensors in our gut. There's as many there as there are in our brain. So, indigenous knew this. So in relying on your gut feeling, which seems to be coming more into the workplace through emotional intelligence for one, and that's one of the doors in, I believe. But it seems to be much more desired to be able to talk about that in Otto Scharmer's work, the co-presencing and all of that process is about being in that place. How do you see that evolving in the business world from your perspective? And do you see it as another accelerated learning curve?
um, I don't know that it's going to be accelerated. I think that this is something that is entrenched in culture and tradition, and it's going to take longer um, to come out of that into a more collaborative mindset. There will be incidents, traumas, disasters, whatever, that can accelerate that locally. So when they had the tsunami, hit Japan, and now all the nuclear stuff is a mess. They're still cleaning that up. Well, that forced people to do things differently, whether they wanted to or not. And so you'll see events occur which may hyper accelerate collaboration where there wasn't any in existence before, is very nominal. Worldwide, I think the internet is going to continue to advance the concept of this idea of community that I was talking about, where people can get together and work towards a common goal. And if you understand that doing it by yourself is going to be slower, more painful, maybe never, as compared with doing it with someone else. Ultimately, that part of your brain, which is acting in your self-interest, will come to dominant form and go, you really need to do this differently than what you've been doing. And if you can't,
Self-examination, right?
yeah, it's part of self-examination. It's also, well, I just saw Brer Rabbit go by at 100 miles an hour, and I'm plodding along here, and I'm like, to be competitive, I actually need to be collaborative, because the old way is slower. If you look at it, you drill down, you go, I can't be competitive if I'm limited to who I am, what I know. I saw a lot of this in my career in technology transfer, technology licensing, where you'd walk in representing a small business, some genius guy came up with this new invention, and the big business will go, it wasn't invented here. We don't, and it can't be any good because we've spent a gazillion dollars with all these wonderful people who are all in our doors. And so therefore you can't have created anything we didn't create.
Like WorldCom, right? Its
Yeah.
dissolution was because of somebody not sharing a piece of software with the other divisions that allowed them to talk to each other.
Yeah. And so at some point though, almost everybody's come to recognition that innovation can occur anywhere, anytime, with anyone. The human brain has the ability to do things, as we were talking about, that we still haven't fully realized. And when somebody comes in with a great idea, the fact that you didn't create it, your whatever macho, attitude or I'm better than you attitude has to be set aside, because if you don't embrace that change, somebody else will. And if they're your number one competitor, woe for you for being stingy in your thinking or narrow-minded in how you go about something.
And it seems to boil down to your personal liabilities, limitations, and excuses for having that change. On a global scale, looking at a big system, integrating the earth, looking at natural systems, how do you see, because there's a lot of biomimicry going on as well, but let's take it even broader than that. How do we look at how the earth is working with itself in order to understand ourselves better? Because it's got much longer cycle times, right? and we're not necessarily machining anything. However, we are in a process of evolving with this natural system that's built in each one of us that we have yet, because we're bereft of understanding the inner side of things. It seems to be coming more present in looking at the larger scale and the scope of how the big nature reflects us and vice versa. How do you see it evolving?
I think we're going through a self-awareness right now where we're understanding more, sometimes better, where we fit into a larger system. We're a small component, forceful, have the ability to influence outside of our weight, so to speak.
Kind
But
of
we're
like an
still
aircraft engine with stacked dimensions on the parts so that it all fits together and doesn't blow apart when it turns on.
right. But at the same time, we're a minor part of a much greater system, and we're doing some things that are actually not in our self-interest. There are things that everybody would agree that's bad, you shouldn't do that, but we're still doing it because we used to do that. We haven't caught up with ourselves. At the same time, a lot of stuff that's going on now, unfortunately, has been politicized, where people, take a side on a particular issue to advance their political career or their power base, and it mucks up the truthfulness or the accuracy of the information we're looking at, and it can cause us to do things that may, on the surface or superficially, look good, but may actually do nothing or even be counterproductive. I got into an argument one day on carbon credit trading, and
That'll be good.
and the guy was going, he says, well, this is good for the planet. And I go, because they're giving carbon credits to people who quit polluting. I'm not sure that I'm understanding exactly where the balance is at in this. And if they're claiming that this is causing a problem, such as rising ocean levels, shouldn't we be building levees in Bangladesh and India and spending our money, doing something like what the Dutch have done, to keep the oceans out, as opposed to making people rich, selling and buying stuff on a digital exchange somewhere? And I don't have a good answer to that question. I find it challenging for someone to say this is good, but somehow it's not translating to something that seems
Sure.
to be addressing the problem.
Now, doesn't that come from perspective, right? That because we have multiple perspectives, and you get a group of people, you're going to have 8.1 billion people now. They've each got their own perspective, and from that we build our perceptions. And the old adage that perception is reality. For many, that's an emotional reality. That may not be true, but we're attached to it because of our emotional anchor in it. How can we change our perspectives to move away from that and see things in a clear, more observational capacity?
Well, to me, uh, more experiences, more diverse experiences, talking to more people gives you their perspective. And if you're listening hard and understanding where they're coming from, that alters your thinking. There's no way that it is not a catalyst in impacting what you do and how you think, because you are seeing it. And we talk about depth perception. We have two eyes, so I can tell you that this is so many inches in front of my face. Well, if I use thinking or thoughts in that same way, where instead of just my thoughts, I have two thoughts. Well, now I've got perspective. I have 40 thoughts or 1,000 thoughts. I have more perspective. And ultimately, this can help you be more empathic to someone else. You're going, well, I see where they're coming from. I may not agree with them. I wouldn't do it the same way they did it, but I get a different reaction than if I just say no. Not my way, not me,
Sure.
my way or the highway. And we see this, in some of the conflicts in the world and some of the innovation and issues over the environment, where you're going, okay, I understand you want to do that. And, maybe I disagree, but I'm not necessarily going to oppose you. I'm not necessarily going to expend energy fighting you, because you might be right. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
So you're kind of talking about the observational space. So let's go back inside for a minute. When you are observing from an internal, hopefully not attached or neutral place, are there moments where those insights, something pops in that wasn't there before because you were able to observe it, and it isn't anything that the individuals that you're listening to is saying, it's something in addition to that just made itself clear?
Yeah, I was joking earlier about connecting the dots, and um, Tom Fry likes to use the word epiphanies, where I
They
call
are.
them they're a major dot collection. It's not just two dots. It's like, oh wow, I got 20 dots over here that I didn't know are going to impact these 20 dots over here, and they all do it at the same time. And it's kind of a leap forward in your thinking, because there's a sudden clarity, a crystallization of understanding how these parts all work together. And yeah, that happens all the time. I mean,
How do we get there? What did you find? What advice can you give to help others to go to that place and be open, be observant, rather than trying to think solutions, think on their own, right? Because our thinking, when we ask the questions, we don't know how to shut up. We keep thinking, and so the answers can't pop through. How do you get to that place where the answers can pop through?
I think there are two elements I would recommend. I did a little bit of work with a Jesuit university, and the Jesuits talk about the term discernment. This was an interesting term for me, where you're supposed to stop periodically, at least once a day, maybe more, and reflect on where you've been, where you're going. And it's kind of a timeout, clear your head, make sure that if you're running at full tilt speed, it's in the direction you want it to go instead of just running at full tilt speed.
Right.
And so I take that and then I go back to putting yourself in the other person's shoes. If I see something doing something that I totally disagree with, and I have to admit that happens quite often, it's like saying, well, am I in this?
That happens with intelligence and experience now, doesn't it?
Well, it's like, I'm in one political party, and I didn't like what they did. I look at the other political party, or I listen to this news channel, which I know is biased in this direction, or this news channel in this direction. And it's not like I'm trying to educate myself in the sense of I must be thinking wrong. I'm just trying to figure out where they're coming from.
Mhm.
And in some cases I go, yeah, they're still wrong. But
And when you discern, you're looking for resonance, right? You're looking for what feels true. And it has a sense to it that's
well,
undeniable when it happens.
if you think about it from a genetic perspective,
Mhm.
you go, all the DNA in a human, how much of it's the same between you and me? It's almost 100%.
Right.
And yet those little changes are important because you are you and I'm me, and that makes us individuals. But if you start thinking of everybody on the planet as having this high commonality, then you're going, well, how did they get to where they're at? What's driving them to think differently, approach problem differently, do whatever they're going to do? And quite often it's a sense of reaction rather than proactive action,
Right.
where they're saying, I'm hungry, I got to get fed, I have no upside, I've got to steal or do something that is all about them, because they don't feel they have an opportunity. They don't have the luxury of thinking outside of themselves.
Mhm.
I find epiphanies occur when I can stop the noise long enough to let things percolate upstairs.
Right.
But also, I have to have this additional data source coming in, because if it's just me talking to me, the epiphanies don't occur that way.
True. Right. You got to have something to bounce your thoughts off of. It gives some kind of a reflection, even if it's just a mirror, talking to yourself in the mirror. Sometimes that works too.
Well, that's if your mirror's arguing with you, then you have another problem. So
Exactly. Well, we do argue with ourselves, right? Of those 70 thoughts per day, neuroscientists say we get 70,000 thoughts a day, and probably 75% of them are self-deprecating. So you're always arguing with yourself. Looking at that, back to the, we won't go there because that's a deep rabbit hole. You mentioned AI and its applications, and we were talking about the boon in its use. I was had some engagements with Thomas Power. You're probably familiar with him. I think he and Penny started eAcademy years ago as a competitor to LinkedIn, and then sold it. So Tom and I have had a loose relationship. We've had some Zoom calls, and he'd reached out to me a couple of times. He and Penny both send me emails, and I respond to them, and I get ghosted. And so I was like, okay, I see a post on from Tom on LinkedIn. I'm like, I'm just going to chide him a little bit because I know he can take it, right? And so I say, hey, I feel like you've been ghosting me. And so starts up a conversation. He apologizes. We go off on WhatsApp, which I've just now, only recently started using because it's another platform.
that's
And
correct.
then as we're chatting, he sends me a text that has a book title, chapter headings, a description. He says, here's what I found for you. And he queried ChatGPT, or GPT, I don't know what the query was, but he says, here's your next book. And I'm like, I read it and it's like, wow, this is really The Unconventional Conventionalist was the title. And so it's going live on Amazon on Sunday. This is
Great. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's my 33rd. So I tend to put thoughts to paper and share them prolifically. in that, I found out that, wow, here's another activity that I could use chat for to go back in and query all my other works and pull out the anecdotes so that I wouldn't have to go searching through them. And it really truncated the time to produce that book. Took a week. And
Yeah,
I also,
I've enjoyed ChatGPT because one of my current projects is I'm creating a fundraising kit for individuals to go raise money for their favorite charity.
mm,
And I started this just when ChatGPT came out. It's a project that would have been way long gone and done if I had a bunch of other stuff on my plate. But I started out
not
of the
like you
box.
don't have much to do, Carl. I got to admit, your
You
tendrils
don't
are going a lot of
have.
different directions.
Yeah. So, but I went into ChatGPT and I said, okay, I want to do a fundraiser for this particular charity, which happened to be the Cancer League of Colorado, that I'm a member and supporting because of a whole variety of reasons. And I said, so I want to do a fundraiser. I want a preliminary design for a fundraising campaign. And it gives me a framework, like an outline. I go, this is good. Now let's start diving down. But before I went further, I said, first, import all the data for the Cancer League of Colorado. So pull its website, and I uploaded the entire website. Then I uploaded my LinkedIn profile. And now it's talking to me about me talking to it within the context of a
Isn't
fundraising.
that just, that's mind-boggling to where those kind of conversations can take place now.
Yeah, so then I went from there. I said, okay, using my approach to raising capital, let's throw in my 8 steps of motivated money, where we start with the donor, in this case, in mind, or instead of the investor. Why would they give money to a charity? And it started spitting out all these things. I go, wow, there's 3 more that were not on my list that were on its list. So this is good. And then I went from there and I got the entire campaign plan done on ChatGPT in 4 hours. and I was looking at it, goes, this
So
would have
let's
been
talk about time management for just a moment, because I know you're a master at that with all you're doing, and how, in the process, what do you find are the keys to being able to do more with less
it has to do
time?
with continuous prioritization of what you should be working on. So there isn't a day or a half day goes by that I don't pull out what I'm working on and I rearrange the list. I've got certain things I need to do to put bread on the table. I've got certain things I want to do because they're fun. I have certain things I've committed to other people, which sometimes, causes me a great concern.
Little
But
angst, right?
well, it's like, okay, I promised them I was going to do that. I had a meeting with a company today where they're going to do a crowdfunding campaign. I promised someone else I would help them. It's a donation of time. But if this works in combination with a few other things, some good things happen. So I'm like, in whatever, scoring system I'm using, this has got merit, but it's a long-term play as opposed to short-term. But I go through this all the time, and this allows me to basically put better projects ahead of lesser projects. Because I could have 1,000 projects. That's no problem for me, but I can't do 1,000 projects. So I always have to be balancing. And Clayton Christensen. Sorry, got his name. It's my dyslexia showing up. He talks about in his book, How Do You Measure Your Life, is the title, that you have a personal life and you have a business life. And everybody talks about balancing the two. He goes, it's not possible. He says, this is a force and this is a force, and they're competing entities. So let them compete in a friendly fashion for you, because you're the common resource between these two things.
But if you look underground, you got the mycelium that's already coordinating, collaborating. You're just not aware of it yet.
Yeah, and then at that point, you make sure each is properly funded, resourced, so they can each be their own thing, and they will achieve some equilibrium. They won't necessarily, but it keeps the business side typically from dominating the personal life. And I recommend this to all my clients. I said, sit down, create your personal goals, create your business goals, and then let's have a competition to see how this all works itself out.
Right. Or see how the two can merge so that they're both so that there's a win-win again.
Right. That's where you look for the harmonies, the synergies, the all those fun terms that talk about they don't have to be mutually exclusive. They don't have to be independent silos. This one can do good over here. It's like I get invited to go to a conference. Well, I take my wife along with me and she gets a vacation while I'm at the conference. Okay, that's a win-win.
Right, right.
And so you look for those opportunities where they are going to work together because they are supposed to be friendly competitors, not hostile antagonists. And this gives you the ability to do better time management. Then after that, the next thing is figure out anything you can delegate, outsource to someone else who could do the same thing as good or better than you can. So don't do that anymore. And that frees you up to do only the things you can do that you want to do. You kind of narrow down, pare down this list to a manageable level, hopefully, and then you move forward. And then you look for tools like AI that says, oh, that's a tool that makes me do the same thing I was going to do in lesser time. That's a good thing. I just found a new transcription software, so every time I'm on like a call like this, it automatically captures everything. It breaks it. It gives me a full transcription, video highlights. It gives me a to-do list. And I'm sitting going, wow, this is great. I don't have to take notes any longer. Their notes are better than my notes anyway. So I save time. So I'm always looking for tools, as you say, one more thing to learn.
Sure.
That's a constant challenge around
And
here.
it brings up the question mentor, asked me this probably 10, 15 years ago, says, why should you be doing well what you shouldn't be doing at all? Same thing where you are prioritizing. Now how we do that is, of course, widely varied between individuals, and yet the process is still relevant.
It is. Yeah, I mean, at some point you have to be careful that you're not dumping on somebody something that you just don't want to do. Although there is some merit in that if it's going to impair or interfere with everything else you're doing.
Well,
There's certain things.
if you do it, there's something that you don't like to do it first, get it out of the way, and then you don't have the stress.
Yeah, no, it's true because it'll hang there. And the stress will build. I haven't done it, haven't done it, haven't done it. If you write it in your list or on your to-do list every day for 10 days in a row, and as it comes a point where you say, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet on this one, I'm going to get it done.
Yeah. So let's go back to the inside for just a little bit. We're almost out of time. What would you offer as an internal perspective for those to help better manage their creative capacity in bridging the personal business lives?
I think that too many businesses start with not enough knowledge and not enough defined goals with metrics in those goals. They don't know they don't know where the finish line is. They don't know what success means to them. They're almost jumping off the cliff to being completely reactive throughout this entire experience, however it's going to be. And as a consequence, they have a tendency to be buffeted by the winds, or anyone who walks up says you're doing this wrong, they have to stop and think, was this what I was supposed to be doing? Or they get distracted or they get pushed off the road. If you sit down and you go, if I get to this point, I'll be happy, wealthy, whatever, you're going to use as a metric, and you write it down and you say, this is what I want to accomplish. Then you reverse engineer, from where you're at to that point. That creates a process, that creates milestones, that creates metrics.
And the entrepreneur map, right? Start with the vision in mind and back it up.
Yeah.
Back it out, rather.
Yeah, and at that point, then if you get there, good. If you don't get there, you pretty much know what else you needed to
somewhere.
do.
Rather than not having a roadmap and not knowing where you're going to end up, you're going to end up somewhere that's at least in line with where you were wanting to head.
Right. And then we all talk about you have to adjust to changing markets and so forth. And the word pivot has come up to a point where it's a painful word for me to hear it, even though I understand
Oh
it.
my God, another
But
P word, right?
yeah, no, but it's like you talk and says, well, I pivoted. And then, and then 6 months later, I pivoted again, then I pivoted again. And I came up with a term for multiple pivot. It's called a pinwheel. And
Well, at least you're not traveling, right? You'd be called on that one.
yeah, yeah, but it's just like, okay, do you have a direction? Do you know where you're going? And if you haven't set a goal, then how do you know that you made any progress? And having progress, even if it's minor, like my current weight loss program, where I was down another pound today, and I'm going to be celebrating that. And everybody goes, it's just a pound. I go, no, you don't know how much energy went into getting that 1 pound off.
Sure.
So it's a major accomplishment for me, and I'm happy because I accomplished something. But if I don't have a goal, I'm just 1 pound lighter.
Right, right.
I wouldn't have
And
got
to
there
be
if I
able to
didn't.
acknowledge that, to celebrate the accomplishments and to just pause, reflect, and honor what went
Yeah,
into that for a moment. And most people don't know, right? It's like nobody knows what you're going through unless they ask you or you're, talking about it on a podcast.
right. And so now everybody knows I'm overweight, and that's why the camera is this high and not going down. But you know, the thing here is that if you do something and you do it in a continuous fashion. If you have a goal, you have milestones along the path to your goals, that gives you some sense that you're moving in the direction you want to move. That gives you a sense of comfort at some level. You're getting something done. It may be way slower than you wanted, but you're still making progress. If you don't know where you're at, you're essentially lost. You go, did I make progress today or not? I have no idea. Well, that's not a feeling to take home at the end of the day. I like to go, well, I did this. And, I continuously look for things that might be, I call them basket weaving things, but they're tangible accomplishments that I
The
can look at
little
and go, I
details
did
that
that
make
much
the
today.
most difference. It's really interesting how the smallest detail and the subtle choices that we make, or subtle activities that we have, build into that larger. Again, my dad used to tell me, he's 32nd degree Mason as well. He says, take care of the little things first. The big things will take care of themselves.
Well, the big things are typically part of the little things.
Mhm.
One of my few books that I read that had any great impression on me was The Theory of Constraints by Goldratt.
Mhm.
And he said every big problem is comprised of small problems.
Right.
And if you look at the big problem, you break it to small problems, there's probably one of them that if you knock it down, everything else gets easier. And
Sure.
I totally agree with that. Where the big problem may be something you can't conquer if you let it remain entangled all in itself.
Yep.
But if you break it down to bite-sized pieces or things you, as I call it, you can wrestle to the ground. Once that one's out of the way, the next one may be easier, and it typically is.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the problems of the world today, we need to kind of stop and think about, well, if I did this or did that, the problem gets smaller. And even though it may not be a major leap forward, the problem's still smaller. So that's a better place to be than yesterday.
Oh, absolutely. And a perfect place to close the conversation. This has really been wonderful, Karl. And thank you so much for your time, your insight, your wisdom, and your willingness to share it in all the ways that we were able to journey into today. I truly
Well,
appreciate that. I know our audience will too.
so Zev, thank you for asking me questions nobody else asked me. So
Wonderful to
usually,
know.
yeah, we're deep into detail on, how do you do a safe note or an installment loan or some other such thing, which are very interesting to people who geek out on financing, but we don't really get into the human side of it enough. And um, I think your questions are questions everybody should be thinking about, asking themselves, and seeing how we all fit into this larger system and what are we doing to make the larger system better, doing our small part to make the whole a better system. So thank you for the questions.
Thank you for the acknowledgement of that. That means a lot, especially from you. I totally appreciate that. And thank you again. And namaste and in cats. Thanks for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I will see you next time.